Let's get reaction to the news right now from Peter Boockvar. He is Chief Investment Officer at Bleakley Advisory Group. He's also a CNBC contributor. And Peter, what really strikes me with this is back in May, Buffett had told us that he thought market prices for stocks were fair, that still beat anything you saw in terms of looking at the treasuries or anything else. But when it came to actual companies, to buying full companies outright, he thought those prices had gotten bid up because there's just so much cash that's out there floating around.
Right. So private equity on average is paying an EV to EBITDA multiple of almost 12 times now. Back in 2007, it was not even 10. Because we have all this money that's gone into private equity because people feel like private equity is somehow safer. Now, granted, they've had great returns over the past 20-plus years, but you don't mark to market. So you look at last December, we talked about the decline in stocks. Well, private equity didn't mark to market their companies. So all this money's piled in. It's burning a hole in private equity pockets. Buffett is obviously more price sensitive than a private equity firm that wants to deploy the capital because then they start making fees on it. But it's also interesting is that for Warren Buffett, tech data was a way of playing technology by being technology agnostic. They have over 100,000 different customers, over 100,000 different products, where IBM, he sort of chose who was going to win in technology. Apple, he considered a more consumer products company. Tech data, it doesn't matter who wins and loses in terms of software and hardware. It's as long as companies are using technology, tech data benefits.
You know, tech data, just a little more information about it, because I didn't know that much about it until I started digging into it. They are middlemen, essentially. It's a good tech bellwether to see who's doing what, when, and where. Right now, I think their biggest product that they sell, Apple, makes up 16% of the products that they sell. 11% comes from Hewlett-Packard Enterprises. Another 11% comes from Cisco. Here are some of the big partners that they team up with on this. But it is a good way of kind of seeing what's happening in the industry and seeing what changes. I looked up an article that said 5 years ago, I think, or maybe 4 years ago, back in 2015, analysts were concerned that Apple was becoming a bigger player. It was making up to something like 30% of the sales at that point, and people thought it was going to be too hot. But it kind of shows you the fortunes of some of these companies, these other big tech players that are out there.
Right. I think Tech Data has over 1,000 different vendors that they're selling product for. Right. So whoever is up and down, it won't matter.
So how much, though, do you want to own the company to see what's going on?
You mean from Buffett's perspective?
Yeah. Find out if Apple or somebody else.
You could maybe make the argument he owns so many other companies that have to use so many other services already that he should be able to have decent visibility into the world of technology to begin with. But this gives you the direct sort of line.
Yeah, and if you're going to sort of play that way without having to pick and choose who's got the better product, which is what Buffett acknowledges that's not what he's good at, this is just an easier way of capturing growth in the technology space without having to figure out who's going to be a good product and what's not.
I'm suggesting we were talking about the idea you own it in part so you understand.
Right.
You actually see what's going on in terms of who's winning and who's losing. And then basically, I mean, this is one of the things people don't talk about.
That's sort of insight into...
insight into it. Some people would say actually too good of an insight. But this is something that's happening, by the way, now in the private equity space a lot.
Oh, there's no question. And I'm sure with Todd Combs helping out in sort of broadening Buffett's horizon in terms of the type of things he invests in, this will be a huge help if they were to buy it and bring it in-house.
Yeah, Todd Combs is actually the one who got the call from Bank of America. Buffett took a look at it after that and then brought Greg Abel into it to actually go down and do the negotiations with the company. Private equity, there's a company called CVC Capital, a private equity company that bought one of the competitors to Tech Data back in January for $1.8 billion. That company was Converge One Holdings. So it is an interesting area for private equity to kind of get involved.
Right. Well, no, the secondary issue that we were raising.
I like that. Yeah, I like it.
Well, but it's a little complicated. Nobody really raises it, but we should raise it. So you have some private equity companies that are now buying businesses that have great access to sales
broad
data.
Market data, stuff that people want that too.
But now a lot of private equity companies that used to just buy other private companies also have a public trading arm, right? So, and there's not a Chinese wall, so they're able to say, look, this is really selling. We see this. And then they're able to buy the stock of the other companies, and then you have to decide whether you think that this is good, bad, fair, indifferent.
I don't know. It's one of the reasons that I like having private equity guests on. The first thing they can tell us if they've got 60 or 70 or 80 different companies, give me a broad swath of what you see in the economy, and they've probably got a pretty good idea.
Sure. No. I'm raising a different issue, which is
privately telling other people
we
to buy
always
or
talk
sell.
about what really constitutes inside information, whether we think there's a fair playing field in the marketplace, whether we think that my mother or father actually has the same access to information as an investor. Do you have the access to research analysts? But in this case, do you have access to actual sales data? If you have actual access to sales data, is that different? Right. Should you be limited in terms of your ability to actually buy into public stocks that are on the other end of these things? And that is a whole world that has not been explored now that private equity has attached themselves effectively to, some people call it the casino, but the stock market.
So Buffett owns a lot of Apple stock, and Apple is Tech Data's biggest customer, is basically what you're saying. In terms of,
I wasn't connecting it to Buffett, but I'm just suggesting the insight issue, and you have to decide how great that insight is or not. By the way, you could argue it's just one slice in terms of the insight, meaning you're not getting, one retailer's insight is different than somebody else's insight, and that's one of the arguments why you probably could go down.
And Tech Data, I wouldn't be surprised if this would have been a platform for something bigger. Tech Data, huge revenues, but tight margins. Very low margin business. You need scale, you need size in that business to succeed.